You're sitting in a bustling conference room, surrounded by colleagues, when your phone lights up with an incoming call from your husband. You step into the hallway, expecting the usual mundane conversation about dinner plans or weekend activities. Instead, you're met with words that feel like a punch to the gut. "I'm divorcing you," Tyler announced, his voice dripping with smugness and triumph. "Oh, and by the way, I've already sold our apartment. You'll need to figure out where you're going to live now. Enjoy that. My name is Amelia." And that devastating phone call was just the beginning of what would become the most empowering chapter of my life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The sheer audacity of his words, delivered with such callous indifference, was almost surreal. Here was a man I'd spent 6 years of my life with, someone I'd trusted implicitly, casually dismantling our entire existence together as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. Tyler and I had been together for 6 years that I thought represented growth, partnership, and shared dreams. We'd worked tirelessly to purchase our cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the physical manifestation of everything we'd built together, every sacrifice we'd made, every late night we'd spent planning our future. But as I stood in that sterile hallway, Tyler's cruel words echoing in my ears, I realized that what I'd perceived as partnership had been something entirely different. Looking back, the warning signs had been there all along, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to this moment of devastating revelation. There were the dismissive attitudes whenever I raised concerns about our finances. Tyler had a way of brushing off my questions with that charming smile of his, followed by a quick kiss that was meant to silence my doubts. I'd always interpreted his confidence as competence, his assurance as evidence that he had everything under control. Now I understood that his confidence stemmed from something far more sinister, his belief that he could manipulate me at will. "You sold the apartment?" I managed to ask, keeping my voice remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Yeah," he replied with a dry, heartless laugh. "Nicole and I need the money to set up our life together. She deserves better than that tiny place anyway." Nicole. The name hit me like a physical blow, though I'd suspected for months that there was someone else lurking in the shadows of our marriage. Tyler's increasingly frequent late nights at the office, his sudden business trips that seemed to multiply exponentially, and the growing emotional distance between us, all of it suddenly made perfect sense. But hearing him speak her name so casually, as if I were the intruder in their carefully constructed fantasy, ignited something fierce within me. Instead of crumbling, instead of giving him the satisfaction of hearing me break down, I surprised myself with my response. "Sounds good," I replied evenly, each word carefully measured and controlled. Tyler thought he'd orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. He believed he'd pulled the rug out from under me, leaving me powerless and scrambling while he rode off into the sunset with his newfound love and a substantial financial cushion. What he didn't realize was that his own carelessness and arrogance had set him up for the ultimate downfall. The rest of that day passed in a surreal blur. I sat through client meetings, nodding at appropriate intervals and contributing when necessary, but my mind was racing at breakneck speed. Tyler was so certain he'd won, so convinced that he'd left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a broken heart. But there was one crucial detail that his ego had prevented him from remembering or perhaps even noticing in the first place. Several months earlier, when we decided to refinance our apartment to take advantage of lower interest rates, I'd had the deed transferred solely into my name. Tyler had agreed to this arrangement without much thought or investigation because it meant securing a better financial deal. True to form, he'd never bothered to read the paperwork carefully or ask detailed questions about the implications. His signature on those documents had been as casual and thoughtless as everything else he did. By the time I returned to my hotel room that evening, my initial shock had crystallized into something much more powerful, unwavering resolve. I wasn't going to spend my evening crying into a pillow or desperately calling friends for emotional support. Instead, I was going to fight back, and I was going to win decisively. My first call was to Chloe, who served double duty as both my lawyer and one of my closest friends. I laid out the entire situation in meticulous detail, my voice remaining calm and controlled even as my pulse hammered against my throat. "He sold the apartment?" Chloe repeated, her voice filled with incredulous disbelief. "Does he even realize that legally, he can't do that without your explicit consent?" "Apparently not," I responded, and for the first time that day, a hint of genuine amusement crept into my tone. He seems to think he's already spent the money on furnishing his new life with Nicole. Chloe's laughter was dry and knowing. Well, he's about to receive a very rude awakening. That sale is completely invalid from a legal standpoint. You can prove sole ownership, and if he's taken even a single penny from the prospective buyer, he's opened himself up to serious fraud charges. The word fraud sent an unexpected jolt of satisfaction coursing through my veins. After years of feeling powerless in my own marriage, the prospect of turning the tables felt intoxicating. What's our next move? I asked, already feeling more empowered than I had in months. First, we notify the buyer immediately that the sale isn't legally binding, Chloe explained with professional efficiency. Then we draft a formal letter for Tyler that clearly outlines the consequences of his actions. If he's foolish enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court and let a judge sort out his mess. As I hung up the phone, an unusual sense of calm settled over my shoulders like a protective cloak. Tyler had been so certain that he'd outsmarted me, so convinced that he'd left me powerless and desperate. In reality, his arrogance and lack of attention to detail had set him up for what would become the most humiliating experience of his life. I spent the remainder of my business trip channeling all of my energy into work, compartmentalizing my emotions with a precision that surprised even me. The betrayal still stung, there was no denying that, but the prospect of reclaiming my life and watching Tyler's smugness crumble into dust gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. When I boarded my flight home, I felt like a different person than the woman who'd received that devastating phone call just days earlier. I was ready to face Tyler head-on, ready to systematically dismantle every lie he'd constructed, and ready to begin writing a new chapter of my life, one where I held all the power. The flight provided hours of uninterrupted thinking time, and I used every minute to process how completely everything had unraveled. Tyler's audacity was truly breathtaking. He hadn't even attempted to hide his betrayal or show the slightest remorse for his actions. He'd treated me like just another obstacle to bulldoze on his path to freedom and happiness. But instead of allowing myself to spiral into anger or despair, I focused entirely on what would happen when I returned home. Tyler thought I was powerless, but he had no idea that I'd been unknowingly playing a long game that was about to pay off spectacularly. As soon as my plane touched down, I called Chloe from the luggage carousel. "I'm back," I announced, hauling my suitcase off the conveyor belt. "What's our next step?" "We've already notified the buyer about the situation," she replied, her tone brisk and businesslike. "They were absolutely shocked, to put it mildly, and they're definitely not happy with Tyler's deception. The good news is they're willing to cooperate fully, which significantly strengthens our legal position." "And what about Tyler?" I asked, curious about his reaction to the bombshell we'd just dropped. "I sent the formal letter to his email this morning," Chloe informed me. "It clearly outlines the illegality of the attempted sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the potential criminal consequences he's facing for fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's probably furious and scrambling to figure out his next move." Perfect, I thought to myself. Let him stew in his own panic and desperation. When I arrived home, the apartment felt eerily different, as if the very energy of the space had shifted during my absence. Tyler's belongings were still scattered throughout, his jackets draped carelessly over chairs, his shoes tossed haphazardly by the entrance, but the place no longer felt like ours. It felt like mine, and that realization was both empowering and liberating. I took a deep breath, set my suitcase down, and prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation that would come when Tyler returned. Sure enough, Tyler came storming through the door that evening, his face flushed red with anger and his phone clutched tightly in his trembling hand like a weapon. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, frantically waving the letter that Chloe had sent. "You're actually trying to tell me that I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." "No, Tyler," I replied with remarkable calm, crossing my arms and meeting his furious gaze directly. "It's not half yours. The deed has been in my name exclusively for months. You cannot sell something that you don't legally own." Tyler froze mid-rant, his expression shifting from pure rage to confusion to something approaching panic. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. I walked calmly to the file cabinet, retrieved the deed I'd prepared for this exact moment, and held it up for him to see clearly. "After we refinanced earlier this year, I had the deed transferred solely to my name. You signed off on it without question, remember? Or did you just skim through the paperwork like you always do, too arrogant to pay attention to the details? For several long moments, Tyler said absolutely nothing. Then, his expression twisted into an ugly sneer that revealed the true nature of the man I'd been married to all these years. You think you're so smart, don't you? He spat. This changes nothing. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a complete fool when it all falls through. I stared at him without blinking, my voice steady and unwavering. The sale is already void, Tyler. The buyer knows it, understands the situation completely, and they're prepared to take legal action if you don't return every penny of their money immediately. And speaking of money, I took a deliberate step closer, lowering my voice to barely above a whisper. If you've spent even a single cent of that deposit, you're in even deeper trouble than you realize. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, Tyler's overconfident facade began to crack. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, but he couldn't meet my eyes anymore. Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about, I replied, my voice gaining strength with each word. You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive and trusting to notice what you're really doing. But guess what, Tyler? I've been paying attention to everything, and now you're going to deal with the consequences of your actions. He started pacing frantically around the living room, his frustration mounting with each step. This is completely ridiculous, he protested. You're blowing everything completely out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here. I raised an eyebrow, allowing a small smile to play at the corners of my mouth. Actually, I absolutely can. This apartment is legally mine, and mine alone. You can stay here temporarily, but only because I'm extending you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be crystal clear about something: I'm not going anywhere. Over the following days, Tyler's anger transformed into something far more pathetic, pure desperation. He called me repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that alternated between desperate begging and empty threats. Meanwhile, Chloe worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that every legal loose end was properly tied up. The buyer officially rescinded their purchase agreement, furious with Tyler for wasting their time and money with his fraudulent scheme. Chloe also began drafting the preliminary paperwork for our divorce proceedings, ensuring that I would be in the strongest possible position moving forward. You're in an exceptionally good position, Amelia, she assured me during one of our strategy meetings. Tyler has absolutely no leverage here. Between the voided sale and the potential fraud charges hanging over his head like a sword, he'll have no choice but to cooperate fully if he wants to avoid an even bigger legal mess. Her words brought tremendous relief, but they also served as a stark reminder of just how much I'd allowed Tyler to control and manipulate my life over the years. I'd ignored his dismissiveness and arrogance for so long, telling myself that confrontation wasn't worth the emotional energy. Now I could see clearly how much of myself I'd given up in the process, and I was absolutely determined to reclaim every bit of it. Lauren, my best friend and strongest supporter, came over one evening to help me begin the therapeutic process of reorganizing the apartment. We methodically boxed up Tyler's belongings, carefully stacking them in the corner of the living room like artifacts from a life I was eager to leave behind. How's he handling all of this? She asked, holding up one of his ridiculously expensive designer TIs with an amused smirk. Not well at all, I replied, laughing despite the gravity of the situation. He's still completely convinced that he can somehow talk his way out of this mess, but I'm not budging even an inch. Good for you, she said firmly, tossing the tie into the donation box with dramatic flair. He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or a single second of your time. I nodded, feeling an overwhelming wave of gratitude for her unwavering support. For far too long, I'd felt completely alone in my marriage, carrying both the emotional and financial burden while Tyler took credit for everything positive that happened. But now I had people firmly in my corner, and that support made all the difference in the world. The final piece of my carefully orchestrated plan fell perfectly into place the day Tyler had the audacity to bring Nicole to what he still somehow considered his apartment. I was sitting at the dining table, calmly reviewing some legal paperwork, when they walked in like they owned the place. Nicole looked around with an insufferably smug smile, her arm looped possessively through Tyler's, as if she were already the lady of the manor. So this is where we're going to be staying? She asked, her voice dripping with entitlement and premature victory. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding with adrenaline but my resolve absolutely unshakable. "No," I said with quiet firmness. This is where Tyler was staying temporarily. "You, Nicole, will not be staying here at all." Her confident smile faltered immediately, and she glanced at Tyler with growing confusion and concern. Tyler, meanwhile, looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. "What is this supposed to mean?" he demanded, his voice reaching a pitch that would have been comical under different circumstances. "This," I said, gesturing to encompass the entire apartment around us, "is my home. Not yours, certainly not hers, and definitely not some kind of romantic hotel for you two to play house in after you stabbed me in the back." The confrontation that followed was everything I had hoped it would be. Nicole's composure cracked completely when she realized that Tyler had lied to her about virtually everything: the apartment ownership, the money from the supposed sale, and his ability to provide the lifestyle he'd promised her. "Wait, what is she talking about?" Nicole demanded, her voice growing sharp with panic. "You told me this was your apartment, that you had sold it and had money." Tyler tried desperately to salvage the situation, but it was far too late. I calmly explained exactly what he had attempted to do: sell an apartment that didn't belong to him, commit fraud in the process, and leave me with nothing while he started his new life with her money that didn't exist. "Fraud?" Nicole whispered, taking several steps away from Tyler as if his crimes were contagious. "Are you serious about this?" "Completely serious," I confirmed. "And I'm fully prepared to press criminal charges if he doesn't remove his belongings and leave by the end of today." Nicole didn't need to hear anything more. Without another word, she turned on her designer heels and stormed out, leaving Tyler standing there in stunned silence. Finally forced to confront the reality of his situation, Tyler stood in the doorway, his face red with frustration while Nicole crossed her arms, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "You're being ridiculous, Amelia," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "This is my home, Tyler. The deed has been in my name for months, and you know that. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore." Nicole glanced at Tyler, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her purse strap. "Wait, what's she talking about?" she asked, her tone sharp. "You said this was your apartment, that you sold it." He flinched, trying to wave her off. "It's complicated. I'll handle it." "Oh, it's not complicated," I said, stepping closer. "You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. That sale is void, Tyler, and as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on." Nicole's composure cracked. "You mean the money you told me you had?" She stopped mid-sentence, her voice rising. "Oh my God, did you lie about that too?" "Nicole, let me explain," Tyler said quickly, holding his hands up, but she wasn't having it. "No," I said, cutting him off. "Let me explain. Tyler tried to sell the apartment behind my back, thinking he could pocket the money and leave me with nothing. What he didn't know is that I had the deed transferred to my name months ago. So not only did he fail to sell it, but he also committed fraud by pretending he could." Nicole's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Fraud?" she whispered, taking a step away from him. "Are you serious?" "Yes, fraud," I said, crossing my arms, "and I'm prepared to press charges if he doesn't get his things and leave." By the end of the day, Tyler's facade finally cracked. "You can't do this, Amelia," he said, his voice pleading now. "We've been together for 6 years. You can't just throw me out. You threw me out the moment you made that phone call," I said, my voice hardening. "You told me you were divorcing me and laughed about me having to find a new place to live. You didn't just betray me, Tyler, you tried to ruin me. So don't stand there and act like you're the victim." Nicole took another step back, her eyes darting between us. "This is insane," she muttered, clutching her purse tighter. "You didn't tell me any of this, Tyler. You said you had everything handled." He turned to her, desperation written all over his face. "Nicole, I can fix this. I just need—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't. Just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving him standing there stunned. I couldn't help but smile as the door clicked shut behind her. "Looks like you're on your own," I said, turning back to Tyler. "Now let's talk about what happens next." He slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Amelia, please. I screwed up. I know that, but you don't have to do this." You're right, I said, grabbing a folder from the kitchen counter and setting it on the coffee table in front of him. I don't have to do this, but I'm going to. This is the divorce paperwork. My lawyer has already drafted it, and I suggest you sign it quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the folder, his face pale. You really hate me that much? Hate you? I let out a bitter laugh. No, Tyler, I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. You had everything, someone who loved you, a home we built together, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego. I stood, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I want you out of here by the end of the day. Take your things and figure out where you're going to stay. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine, he muttered. I'll go. Good, I said, walking toward the door. And don't even think about trying anything else. Chloe's already handling everything, and the next time you cross a line, I won't hesitate to let the courts handle it. As I opened the door, Tyler slowly stood, grabbing his coat. He didn't look at me as he walked out, his footsteps heavy with defeat. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he'd been the man I thought he was. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by a sense of relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I'd had made. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Tyler, would take it away from me again. The silence in the apartment after Tyler left was deafening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The space no longer felt heavy with his presence, his entitlement, or his lies. It was just me, the home I'd built, and the quiet realization that I had won, not just against him, but against every doubt I'd ever had about standing up for myself. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had been. His oversized gaming chair, the framed jerseys that had cluttered the walls, and the gaudy coffee table he'd insisted on keeping were all gone. The apartment looked cleaner, brighter, like it was mine again. Lauren came by that evening with takeout and a bottle of wine. Is he really gone? She asked, plopping down on the couch with a dramatic sigh. Gone and not coming back, I said, pouring 2 glasses of wine. I gave him until the end of the day to pack his things. He didn't argue. Lauren raised her glass to fresh starts and well-deserved victories. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the weight of the past week slowly lifting. To never letting someone walk all over me again. Over the next few days, I began to reclaim the apartment piece by piece. I rearranged the furniture, moved my favorite artwork into the living room, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about turning the apartment into a reflection of who I was, not the person Tyler had tried to make me. Chloe called with updates on the legal proceedings, her voice filled with the kind of confidence that made me feel invincible. The fraud charges are off the table since the buyer decided not to pursue them, she explained. But the divorce paperwork is moving along smoothly. Once Tyler signs, you'll be officially free. Hearing the word free made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about the divorce, it was about everything I'd been carrying for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a marriage that didn't value me, it was all finally being lifted. Tyler tried to reach out a few times. His messages ranged from half-hearted apologies to pathetic attempts to guilt me into reconciling. I made a mistake, one read. Can't we at least talk about this? Another was more desperate. You're going to ruin me, Amelia. Is that what you want? I didn't reply. For once, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. He'd made his choices, and now he was dealing with the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment felt like a completely new space, warm, inviting, and entirely mine. As I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, the city lights twinkling outside the window, I thought about everything that had happened. Tyler's betrayal had been a shock, but it had also been a wake-up call. For too long, I'd let myself believe that I didn't deserve better, that I had to settle for whatever scraps of respect and love he decided to throw my way. But now I knew better. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, my life looked completely different. The apartment was unrecognizable, not because of any drastic renovation, but because of how it felt. It was a space that reflected me, my tastes, my personality, and my newfound independence. The absence of Tyler's clutter and his overbearing presence made the home feel lighter, freer. The divorce was moving along smoothly. Chloe had handled everything with precision, ensuring Tyler had no room to argue or complicate the process. He signed the papers without much fuss, likely realizing that he had no leverage. There was no grand showdown, no emotional plea to work things out, just a cold, clean break that felt both bittersweet and deeply satisfying. One day, as I sorted through some old papers, I came across a photo of Tyler and me from our early years together. We were smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and promise. I stared at it for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. There had been good times, moments when I truly believed we were building a life together. But those moments were gone, overshadowed by years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. I tucked the photo into an envelope and put it away in a drawer. It wasn't worth keeping out in the open, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me anymore. Lauren and I celebrated the finalized divorce with dinner and drinks at a trendy rooftop bar downtown. "You're glowing," she said, raising her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I said. "It's the freedom. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." We toasted to that, and as the night went on, I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. I'd faced one of the hardest moments of my life and come out stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back at home, I started planning for the future. The apartment had become more than a refuge, it was a symbol of everything I'd reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday, I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering shadows of my life with Tyler. Until then, I was determined to make the most of every moment in the space I had fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a sense of peace washed over me. I thought about how Tyler had laughed during that phone call, so certain that he'd won, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his downfall, and my quiet strength had been my salvation. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I called the shots, one where I chose happiness on my own terms. And after a long time, I felt truly free.